Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Becoming Predictive with the Help of an Enterprise Data Catalog. Today you are going to learn how Nielsen, the global leader in CPG retail measurement, is undergoing a reinvention that includes new offerings and a move towards predictive analytics with the help of the Alation Data Catalog. Before we get to today's speaker, just a short few notes on the format. This is going to be about 60 minutes of content, but we're going to save the last 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A. If you have a Q&A, even though we're going to save that for the end, you can enter that at any time on the right, and we'll try to prioritize those and get to as many as we can at the end of the presentation. Shortly after the broadcast, the replay will be available, so feel free to share that with any of your colleagues or watch the replay again. And we encourage you to tweet at Alation on Twitter to keep the conversation going. So now to introduce today's speaker. Today we have Andy Carrington, who is a product leader for Nielsen's global data science platform. He's going to discuss a little bit about Nielsen's story and how they're leveraging the Alation Data Catalog. You will also be hearing from Kalb, who's co-founder and chief data officer at Alation. He's going to dive into a little bit more about Alation and the features that Andy is leveraging. So with that, I will hand the ball over to Andy to get started.
Thanks, Nolan. So let me start by introducing Nielsen a little bit as a company. So I guess on the call, if you've heard of Nielsen, it's probably the media ratings company, the TV ratings, but at least half of the business is actually to do with the measurement of sales of consumer packaged goods and fast-moving consumer goods. And we do that globally. We're in 109 countries of the world, one way or another. So as you can imagine, they range from sophisticated markets with mostly electronic data like the US and Western Europe, right at the other end of the spectrum to sub-Saharan African countries where we're still measuring retail, but retail may look like a kiosk or even just a tarpaulin on the street. Transactions are cash or in some cases even mobile phone credit. So stall holders in Africa may literally pay for their stock by using mobile phone credit as currency and handing over the handset that goes with it. So we have numbers of different techniques. We constantly strive to have the most complete coverage that we can. So on the left-hand side of this chart, that increasingly, of course, means electronic internet retailing. We now have 250 retailers who are either pure play bricks and mortar or rather pure play online or mixed with bricks and mortar that we're measuring. We do measure hard discounters and semi-wholesalers and the wholesale clubs. We have 50 retailers that are in our service there. But of course, many of those kind of retailers don't particularly want to share the data. They don't find value in it, or they think they're better off not doing that. So we have other means as well. For example, we measure 350,000 shoppers' receipts in those kind of channels as another way of getting the data. Now, if I take that receipt measurement as an example, what we receive is literally the receipt. And if you think of when you go to a shop, there's probably a very cryptic description of what you bought and the price of the thing. So we also have a reference data or master data, dimensional data challenge. Across all of those countries, we have something like 52 million individual CPG items that we have catalogued. And between them, 70,000 individual attributes that may be used to describe those different items. And if you think we're measuring every product that's sold in every supermarket in the world, it's not surprising we get to that scale. The set of stores that we measure is similarly large. So there's 640,000 or thereabout stores in the world for which we collect the sales data, either summarized to daily sales or sometimes literally at the transaction level. And that covers the more sophisticated part of the market. When we get to traditional trade, hard to reach channels, more remote markets, we also have more than 10,000 people who spend all day, every day visiting stores looking at what's on the shelf, counting the stock, looking at the order book, and there's 370,000 stores covered that way. So a lot of data is the headline there. What I've described we could probably call measurement, bottom left-hand corner of this graphic that you see on there. And that's been a long-standing business of Nielsen. We've been in business for 100 years in the US, 90 in the UK, less in other countries, but around for a long time. And performance measurement has been the core of what we do, measuring the success of brands, of retailers, and even individuals. So in some cases, people who work in this industry will have their bonus depend on the market share numbers from Nielsen. We've also always been in the business of predicting and activate. By predict, I would mean taking that data to make forward-looking assessments of what might happen next, either in terms of if the current trends continue, what will the quantitative effect of that be, or in the more what-if sense of if I were to make a move such as changing a price, changing an assortment, running a promotion, what benefit would I expect to get? So we've been doing that for a long time, but that's an area that we see growth coming from and an area that we can use a platform strategy and an automation strategy to grow and where the catalog contributes to it. Third part of our business, also a growth engine, is activate. So in order to use that insight to sell more CPG products or to compete, if you're a retailer with your competing retailers, you need to do something. You need to change what's on the shelf, change the price, run a promotion, put the category in a different location, open a shop in a new neighborhood, and our activate business helps you to do that, either by helping to target where that activation occurs. So given a finite field force, which would be the priority stores, what's the priority thing to do when you get in the store, or by measuring compliance. So did your other field agencies really achieve in store what they claim they did? Or if a retailer agreed to execute a certain program, did they actually do it? But to make that a more coherent whole requires us to change our approach, and it's very much a trend that we're seeing with both the manufacturing brand owning clients and the retailers that we work with. So data historically has been disconnected. That needs to become more connected, more coherent. Analytic solutions and ad hoc query and BI tools have been islands and in the hands of experts and subject matter specialists. That needs to become more consistent, more automated, and more democratized in the sense of that data and those tools in a much greater number of hands so that they can be used more widely. Closed technology, point solutions needs to move to open technology, open in the sense of industry standard components and best practice, but also in the case of Nielsen, we're becoming much more open to the idea of working with technologists at our clients to share data, create the connectivity, and as I'll come on to, share the underlying data and the reference data, which lets us work more collaboratively on new models and new insights. And that goes to the service model. So moving from a rather fixed idea of what the Nielsen service is to a much more flexible, collaborative approach with our clients. And we're building a platform, or in fact, we have built a platform. It's in the market live now in the US and a couple of countries of Europe. In order to do that, and if I run through the layers, the top layer is those predictive applications. So I've kind of talked about price and promotion and assortment. They're kind of obvious. We have an innovation practice and a suite of solutions, which goes to knowing that there are new products in the market, so simply detecting the innovation, but more subtly quantifying that. So tools to tell the difference between something that was new and simply cannibalized your previous product, or something that was new and took share from your competitor, or the holy grail, something that was new and grew the category. Business drivers is similar. It's slightly more backward looking. So business drivers is about decomposing the growth or decline that's seen among a portfolio of brands or in a retail category into the effects that drove it. So was it about latent consumer demand? Was it about pricing moves? Was it about promotions? Was it about changing the assortment, and so on? And the key thing with business drivers as a solution on our new Connect Enterprise platform is it's always running. So whereas that kind of study historically would have been a consulting project, a Nielsen consultant would come along, you'd discuss the brief, they'd go away and do their clever modeling and statistics and come back next week with a PowerPoint presentation. Now this runs all the time as part of the data processing, continuously being updated with the Nielsen model. Obviously that saves time to execution. More importantly, what it enables you to do is use those kind of techniques to the smaller brands in your portfolio, the niche brands in the portfolio, and drive the insight deeper into products that might not otherwise benefit from it. So that's the predictive apps layer. Second layer down, slightly more traditional BI. I would say it's not new what we're doing there. The degree of automation is new. So more self-service, more automation, more ready-made decks that you just plug the data into. And the idea of stories in particular there, as I pick out, is more automation around the communication and the collaboration and the interaction to understand and act on the insights. And that extends to allowing suppliers and retailers to work on the same Nielsen data together in the same environment if they choose to, which historically has been a case of form a PowerPoint deck, email it to somebody, wait for a reply, and so forth. Third layer down is what we call the studios. The studios is really new for Nielsen. So we've been in the data business forever. The idea of opening up the raw data or the internal data to clients is really quite new. That would have been a surprising thing for Nielsen to be even talking about 5 or 10 years ago. But now we are. And it's being very well received in the marketplace. There are a few different tools. So Enrichment Studio is about clients bringing their own additional information to the party. Extract Studio is the opposite. So a way to extract the Nielsen data, take it away to your own data warehouse, your own modeling tools and environments. API Studio is the extension of that. Leave the data where it is. There comes a point where the data is too big to shift efficiently or conveniently. So leave it where it is, build your own model, call on the data that you need as you need it through APIs that we expose. And Intelligence Studio, I'll return to a little bit more, is it's almost the combination of all three of those. So the idea of Intelligence Studio is access to the Nielsen disaggregated data, the ability to bring your own data to supplement that, and an environment in which clusters of machines can be spun up to work in the cloud on that data, create new models, so do the data science all in the same environment. And that can even be extended to some workflow and orchestration features to run that model regularly, perhaps triggered by the arrival of some new Nielsen data. So it really opens up the idea of collaborating with technologists and data scientists, as well as the marketeers and sales managers and insight specialists who've been traditionally the individuals that we've worked with. Whole thing has to be underpinned by a layer of data. We've got plenty of it, but now that we are exposing it to our clients and to these tools, it becomes that much more important that it's well organized, well understood, good quality, and coherent. And that's the bit that I'm going to dive into a little bit more. And it has some challenges. So you'll be pleased to know I'm not going to present this slide to you as such, and I'm sure many people on this call have pictures like this that they're familiar with. It's the archetypal kind of complex data flow. So on the left are the things that we know or get from the market, such as the original research we can do into what the product items are, or what the stores are, or the size of populations of certain types of people, the sales data that we get from retailers. It goes through numerous process steps and hopefully outcomes something of value and insightful in the form of the data to feed one of those studios that I spoke about, or the apps from which you can gain some insight. And in between times, the numerous steps are partly there for the reasons I'm sure we all have in our organizations. They've been built up regionally and over time, and with different technology choices, and sometimes by acquisition or startups that we've sponsored. Certainly that's the case at Nielsen. So some of that complexity is of our own making. Some of it, certainly in the case of the Nielsen data, is inevitable. So if I take the retail measurement data, for example, we don't own that data absolutely, usually. It's licensed from a retailer so that we can then share that with their suppliers. The reason that they do that is so that the supplier can work with them on trying to grow the category. It's a win-win. The flip side of that is it comes with licensing conditions. So retailers aren't keen for their competing retailers to know too much about their sales. And they're not keen for their suppliers to necessarily know too much about their private label. Some retailers prefer to nominate a category captain to work with, and other suppliers don't get to see so much data. And these rules can take quite complicated forms, depending on how deep you get into the data. So some of the complexity is inevitable in it. We have to deal with that. What that leads to is complex data models, and I'm sure many people on the call have pictures like this as well. I'm not going to present the detail. What you're looking at here is the list of items, literally. So sometimes data scientists or technologists, our clients, they'll come along and say, well, I'd like to integrate my Nielsen data with some other information that I have, so kindly just please send me the list of UPCs and all the characteristics that describe them. And the answer to that is, well, I could, but I'm not sure it will help you. UPC itself isn't a great unique identifier for an item in the CPG world. It's a pretty well-defined standard, and GS1 do a great job of governing it. But in practice, UPCs can get reused over time. So it can be ambiguous in a time series what they're attached to. Retailers don't necessarily comply, particularly for their own label products and things like fresh produce. They can stick any old number on because it doesn't have to make sense compared to anybody else's. There are grey imports that cross borders, certainly in Europe, but around the world, and so on. So we need to use our own internal numbering. And then we get to, there are promotional packs, limited edition packs, extra fill packs, bonus packs and gift packs, and all the rest of it. And that's before we even get to languages. So once we start working internationally, what a brand owner considers to be one brand may have the same graphic in different markets, but completely different words, even for the name of the brand. So making sense of that lot necessarily requires some nuance to the attributes and the classifications that we put to it. That's our second challenge in terms of the data. So how do we attempt to make sense of all of that? Well, it's not a new idea. It goes right back to Ralph Kimball and Bill Inmon and the Data Warehouse Toolkit and all the rest of it. We talk about conformed dimensions and taking the raw data, bottom layer of this diagram, which is not a great deal of value in its own right until it's been classified and structured, classifying and structuring that with a well-defined set of conformed dimensions to make the connected systems and the data marts that feed the apps. Now, that way of looking at it, a platform process and discipline around it is a little bit new to Nielsen. We've been working on our Connect Enterprise platform for a couple of years. But fortunately, the underlying concept of needing that dimensional data is not. So there's a lot of assets that we have to call on. OGRDS stands for One Global Reference Data System. It is that master file of 52 million UPCs and CPG items. TD Links is a product that you might know if you're in the CPG or retailing world. It's, I would say, the most authoritative directory of what those retail locations are. Spectra gives us the demographics. So demographics can take the form of attributes of persons and households, like what income bracket, how many children, are they urban or rural, what age group, and so forth. It can also be behavioral. So for other purposes, we may classify shoppers and consumers into groups such as, are they price sensitive, working on a budget? Are they promotionally sensitive, attracted by a deal? Are they looking for provenance and health credentials among their products, or are they looking for convenience and speed? And of course, it could be both. Those two aren't mutually exclusive. They're more derived from the data. And even something simple like geography. So it doesn't sound very difficult to find out where a household lives or find out where a shop is located. Organizing that geographical space is also something that we need to bring expertise to. So a DMA is a designated market area. And if you were in the business of media buying or media planning, that's probably how you look at dividing up the USA, and there are equivalents in other countries. And that's a standard which is defined and managed by Nielsen. Similarly, more on the trading side, the sales side of CPG brand owners as opposed to the media side. Tailor about something you'd like them to sell, you better be talking in terms of their trading areas. So that's in our data as well. So dimensions, pretty important. That's our unifying thought. And I sometimes call this the subway map. Looks a bit like it. The idea is that if you have the dimensions, they're the common thread, the route that you can take to navigate from one type of data to another type of data. And being able to do that is where the additional value comes from with the products that combine different ways of measuring shopper and consumer behavior. And that's a key thing that comes from our platform and gets extended further with the studios that we've worked on. The catalog helps us to do that. So you can imagine that was a nice simple diagram. The reality is we have all of the complexity on the previous pages. In some cases, we can remove that. We do use ETL processes to create simpler star schema, BI kind of schemas, but a certain amount of complexity and nuance in the data is inevitable. So having a good way of organizing that and describing it is pretty essential. And this is just the landing page of our catalog. I'll come into a few specifics in a minute. One of the key features, and I mentioned that we do use ETL kind of processes to physically simplify the data in some instances. We certainly need to understand those complicated data flows that I had in the previous chart. So one of the most useful features is a lineage feature. It doesn't matter too much what we're looking at specifically here, but what it's showing us is the calendars in those different sources. So different retailers have different calendars, different ways of organizing days and weeks into trading periods or promotional cycles. And they are referred to in various different source systems that we have. This gives us a neat way of understanding the relationships between them in a graphical, business, human understandable sense. And literally down to the SQL that drives the ETL processes. So it can get quite technical, but the upside of that is very specific and unambiguous what's going on. I said I'd come back to Intelligent Studio. It's kind of the flagship of our studios. And the promise, as I mentioned before, is get to the disaggregated Nielsen data, bring your own to supplement it, work collaboratively on a model, discover something that nobody knew before, basically. And if that's a useful thing, rinse and repeat each week as you need to. And I can give you a couple of examples. So HomeScan is our purchase panel product. We have tens of thousands of households who, one way or another, records their purchasing for us. There's a variety of scanning techniques. Scan the receipt, use a mobile phone, literally rescan your shopping when you get home, depending on quite exactly which part of the panel it is. But the key thing that we learn there is we know the demographic of the household, and because they're a continuous panel, we know they're purchasing over time. That lets us learn something about when they choose to buy a certain product from a category, what are the important features of that product, and infer a decision tree. Decision tree is clearly an important thing if you want to devise a range or an assortment to offer in your shop to maximize the choice and therefore maximize the sales. So that's a standard product. You can buy one of those from Nielsen. But it makes an a priori assumption. It assumes there is a category before we begin. And for these purposes, category would be a set of substitutable items from which you're choosing for some particular purpose. Now, in this use of Intelligence Studio, we worked with a manufacturing client in the health and beauty sort of space, and they had done some research of their own, not Nielsen research, done with other agencies and their own folks, to gain new insight into what the real substitutable products are, what people are really doing with those health and beauty products, and therefore the choices they're making for the different uses that they put them to. What we were able to do is bring those data together, create a decision tree based on a hypothetical at that stage category, a new way of understanding the competitive set or the set of items from which people are choosing, and run the model on that basis. What that does is it quantifies different options, different assortments that you could have based on the decision tree within that new hypothetical categorization. It does two things. It let that manufacturer internally put some numbers to what the benefit would be of being able to redefine the category in that manner. But probably more importantly, from their point of view, it put some science and some quantification to a story they could take to the retailers to pitch the idea. Because ultimately, this is going to be successful if the retailer agrees to rearrange their aisles in that manner for greater benefit. Only possible by bringing the two sets of data together. Neither one would do it in isolation. Spectra is our product which deals with demographics. And Spectra Strategic Insights, one of the things that does is at a very micro level, neighborhood kind of level. If you are a retailer operating a set of stores, it lets you understand what type of people are in the neighborhood by the classic demographic sort of race, income, family size kind of banding. And that's useful because if you know what that type of people typically like to buy, you can optimize the assortment in your shop to try and maximize appeal to them. And hopefully, if you do that, you will sell more. And you know if you sold more or not, because obviously retailers know what they sell. But what's hard to unpick is, so you made the change, you sold some more. Is that actually cause and effect, or is that due to other factors, such as the weather, the action of a competitor, confidence in the economy, and so forth? So in this example, we worked with a retailer. The retailer had a loyalty card scheme, and they were able to bring that along, not at the level of personally identifiable information. They didn't want that to share that with us, and we wouldn't particularly want them to be honest, but at the level of a body of households in each shop. What loyalty data tells us is nothing much about the demographic. So when somebody gets a loyalty card, they really don't tell you what their income is, or if you ask them, they probably don't tell you the truth. What it does do is a great job of that kind of behavioral segmentation over time. What is it that they do? By using that in conjunction with the Nielsen data, we can tell the difference between cause and effect and just correlation. And what that lets us do is say which of those recommendations that were acted on actually made a difference in the store. Now, there's an additional trick to this case study, which is I mentioned that when retailers other than our client here allow us to use their data, they do it on the basis that their competitors don't learn too much. And there are a bunch of rules, business rules, which we agree with them and are contractually bound by, that we have to evaluate so that it's acceptable to know the general trends and purchases of a neighborhood, but only on the basis that it contains enough shops from different retailers that nobody is exposed in a way that they would find unacceptable. So the trick here was we, Nielsen, needed to execute those business rules as part of this project in a way that didn't disclose to our retailing client anything that they shouldn't know. So it's quite an interesting one. So on two fronts, they didn't want us to know the PII of their panelists, of their loyalty card holders, and nor did we, really. But we couldn't tell them everything necessary for the model from the underlying data. So really, we could only have done this by bringing the data together in one place in Intelligence Studio. It's quite interesting. But both examples of where the insight you can get from the whole data is greater than the sum of the parts. You can imagine doing that and bringing that together. You've got to have a pretty good understanding of the data because there's some pretty precise integrations are required a rough and ready sort of mapping of the data won't do for these applications. It's got to be, really precise because they're working at very fine levels of detail. And that's what the catalog helps us to do. And I'll just give you a sense of how we're using it. So one thing we do is write articles. Pretty straightforward. You can't read the text on the screen there, but if you think wiki pages with some structure, you wouldn't be a million miles off. So we can talk about all those nuances of how you describe an item and put some pictures in and give examples and specifics of how they're represented in our data and so forth. But it ties very nicely to the actual data. This is the point of having a data catalog system as opposed to just an intranet page for people to read a document on. So within Alation in particular, we make use of Compose. Compose is a SQL workbench kind of tool where you can actually query the data as well as browsing the metadata of those databases, which are cataloged in Alation. And again, you can't read the screen, but this is actually the correct way of getting the UPC and the characteristic from that rather complicated data model that I showed you. And here's a sample of results which would give you the various descriptions and characteristics that we know about it. And where this is powerful is it lets the subject matter experts provide example best practice SQL, which will give you the correct results with the correct interpretation. In some circumstances, SQL, which will give you results with acceptable statistical parameters that you can safely use in your model, as opposed to, you misread the flags and you used some sample that was too small or something. And it lets you actually look at the data itself so that you can learn by example and navigate through that roadmap. It's not the place where you would actually execute the models. That's going to require more computing horsepower than we've made available to Alation Compose. It's a browse and learn kind of tool, but you can take that SQL and literally paste it into Spark SQL and run it on a cluster of any size to run the model itself. So it becomes a starting point to copy and edit. And then I mentioned this already, but what the Alation Catalog does is taps into the metadata itself very nicely. So, we have a mixture of cloud databases on Microsoft Azure. That's our partner of choice. We make no secret about that. So we have things like Snowflake databases and Impala databases, also data sitting in Parquet files with Hive metastores. We're reading those. Some of our heavy processing is still done on-premise using Oracle and Netezza, so we've got those. And this does a really nice job of reading that metadata so that you're talking about exactly the right table and exactly the right column, but adding both the human description. So what you're actually looking at here is one of our spectra files and the numerous different segments that you can read within it, so you're clear on the definition. And there's also some elements of building further trust and confidence in the data. So users of the catalog can flag what they use, what they find helpful and have confidence in. And there's ways in which it can ingest query logs and feed back to you which are the most frequently used tables, the most frequently used entities, and how they're typically joined. So it's a way of using different ways to build the trust and confidence in the data so that you're looking at the right thing. That was the quick tour. We've made a lot of progress. We've been using this catalog for a bit over a year. We've been working on the platform for 2 years. If you were to ask me, so are you done yet? My answer would be 40%. I'm not sure I could justify that with a great deal of rigor. Kind of feels like we're getting to nearly halfway, but I would say that's about all. To give you a scale to it, we've got 1,500 articles written. 500 of those are the white papers written by subject matter experts kind of style. We've also using the Alation APIs quite a bit, both to populate glossaries. We use those for things like the definitions of facts and metrics that are important to know. Part of that is in existing systems, so we can pull it from there, and it can then be added to by the experts. We use glossaries to catalog the different styles of data marts. You can imagine we make literally thousands, probably tens of thousands of different data marts for different purposes. So we're not going to catalog every single one, but the patterns we catalog. Lots of queries, 612 and growing. Lots of data elements. You can see the numbers there. In terms of people using it, some people would say quite small, actually. So we have 75 authors in our usage stats who are doing that curating and writing of articles. And there's about 400 of our data scientists who are using it. Now, if I tell you that Nielsen as a whole, Media and Connect, has something like 40,000 employees, that's a pretty small proportion. But for where we are at the moment, I'm quite happy with that. And it doesn't surprise me that it's small. It is the experts. By definition, somebody who's going to write SQL, develop data science models, work with machine learning and AI is probably a specialist. We're not going to have many of them. But the flip side of that is, in terms of the opportunity cost of wasting their time, very expensive resources. So if we can save somebody like that an hour, well, that may be an hour of salary, but actually the value of that is much bigger. It's an hour of opportunity cost where they're working on those kind of examples that I ran through, creating insight for our clients, as opposed to messing about, wondering whether they've got the right data and how to understand it and how to use it. And I think it's only upwards from here. It's been very well received in the market, pretty well perceived internally at Nielsen, some learnings along the way, and plenty of journey ahead of us. So that was my summary, and I think I'm handing back to Nolan.
Yes, awesome. Thanks, Andy. That's such an interesting story. And just to remind attendees, if you have any questions for Andy, we'll have a Q&A at the end, and you can enter those into the question box on your right. So now we are going to hand things over to Aaron Kalb, who's the CDO and co-founder of Alation. Aaron is going to explain, dive a little bit deeper into Alation itself and connect to some of the themes that Andy talked about. I'll hand it over to Aaron.
Nolan, thank you. And Andy, thank you so much. That was super inspiring and informative. One of my favorite aspects of my job is that I get to hear how customers are using data in general and using Alation to support those ambitions. And it was cool in this particular case to hear not only how Nielsen is benefiting from Alation and from data, but even how those, that health and beauty customer and that retail customer of yours gets a second order benefit. So Andy just covered the depth, and my goal here in just a few minutes is to cover some of the breadth of other ways other customers are using Alation and some of the technology behind the features that Andy not only described but showed in those screenshots, just to give folks in the audience a richer picture of how some of this might be applicable in your own organizations. And let me see here. So at Alation, one of our core values is that we measure our success through customer impact. Again, great to hear what's happening at Nielsen and beyond. And since there's a very broad range of places where Alation is having an impact, and I want to kind of take you on a tour starting with Nielsen. As Andy pointed out, many folks, myself included, I'll admit, thought of Nielsen as something that was about TV ratings. And of course, we have some customers in the broader TV space. There's some that I can't use their logo, but one that's kind of fun is Disney Plus is a customer. Now we know from Andy how Nielsen is helping the folks who manufacture and distribute consumer packaged goods, like our customers General Mills and PepsiCo, how it helps the traditional retailer channels that then distribute those goods, like our customer Albertsons, which is near me in San Francisco, or Marks and Spencer near Andy in London, and a few of the retailers in the UK as well. And I guess it's a good time to be a retailer, actually, as folks are stocking up and hoarding. Obviously, modern commerce also will happen in online peer-to-peer marketplaces like eBay, which many people know, and its analogs in Argentina with Mercado Libre and Poland with Allegro. But really, the catalog is actually being used across the globe. We have customers in continental Europe, including the Nordics and France, and especially Germany. I'll give a quick plug to Berlin-based Alation customer HelloFresh there in the middle. If you're finding yourself doing more home cooking these days in quarantine, check them out. As well as folks in Latin America, in Australia and New Zealand, really all over the place. What I think is even more interesting, though, is that the enterprise catalog is being used not only by companies in many different geographies, but also in pretty much every industry. So here we have a couple of our energy companies, utilities who are using Alation. That goes from there to tech companies, of course, to financial services firms and banks, which are interesting. These are, of course, very heavily regulated and have critical data governance needs, a bit like some of the ones that Andy mentioned earlier. We'll follow up on that concept. To insurance, big vertical for us, again, has a lot of regulatory side, but also a ton of data to analyze and glean insights from, similar to how Nielsen is doing. And finally, for this presentation, another sector I'll highlight is healthcare, which is also very regulated and is just so relevant right now. We've got folks like hospital networks like HCA, to medical device manufacturers like ResMed, to mail order pharmacies like Express Scripts. And they've always been using data to increase convenience, but now more than ever, there's this other benefit of mail order pharmacy, which is that you can preserve health and save lives in these times of social distancing. I'll share a quick example from Express Scripts later. So really we see across many geographies, many verticals, a lot of use of the catalog. The 34 logos here represent just a small fraction of our worldwide install base. And I think the diversity in vertical, in region, shows just how universal the need is for a modern enterprise data catalog. Because whatever your priorities are, whether that's to store data and move data, to govern and protect data, to have teams of analysts turn data into insights and dashboards, or to have data scientists create predictive data products like some of the ones that Andy highlighted, you need to know what you have and who's using it and how when it comes to data. And that's what the data catalog does. So with that framing, I'm actually going to go and talk about a couple customers in a little bit more detail. I'm going to do two quick stories highlighting these two customers who they're in different parts of the world, very different industries, but they have a lot in common. And that's beyond just the fact that they have these dark blue, all caps, italicized word mark logos. The other thing they have in common, since Andy's talk was all about getting predictive, I wanted to share these two customers in different domains who are also thinking a lot about getting predictive. So Finnair used Alation to intelligently combine weather data, runway capacity data, flight time data, staffing data for flight attendants and pilots, and customer data, and blend it all together so they can actually predict and prevent negative passenger experiences, which in turn have revenue implications, right when weather events are beginning to arise, by doing the whole cascade of, okay, this hail is going to cause this delay, is going to cause so-and-so to have to spend the night in this horrible city and whatever else. And now, it's a tough time for airlines, and it's great that our customers are able to use data to be as predictive and smart as possible. And it's a bit like what Andy was saying about combining all the different data sets in that home scan case to do better categorizations in the Intelligence Studio. So meanwhile, Avista, which is a utility providing electricity and natural gas in Washington State, they are doing predictive maintenance. That's a predictive term you'll hear a lot if you haven't already. They're doing this on meters, energy meters. They're doing this on HVAC systems. And they're also even anticipating and predicting the impact that home solar and electric vehicles are going to have on the grid, and predict demand and supply and how that affects their core business. So, many different customers are getting predictive like Nielsen. And finally, I'll tell you one other example. I think, Andy already covered this in his second case study, but, so many retailers are trying to predict the desires of shoppers to increase retention, increase loyalty, do segmentation and targeted marketing using loyalty cards and things like that. And Albertsons is one of many of our customers who are doing that, and you can hear more about that from the customer if you go to our website. So talking about this idea of getting predictive, how do you do that? And I'm going to talk about this a little bit abstractly and then dive into some features and screenshots to supplement what Andy's already shown. Many analytics leaders that I talk to, CDOs, CAOs, you name it, will talk about this progression they want their organizations to go through, starting with descriptive analytics. What happened last quarter in a dashboard? With descriptive analytics, the idea is somebody will look at that. They'll say, okay, let's say it's 2 weeks from today. I say, okay, what happened in March? What happened in April of 2019? And kind of use those two together, plus some of my hunches about what's been happening lately, to predict kind of on my own what's going to happen in April of 2020. If I said April 2019 and March 2020 to predict April 2020. Not sure if I got that wrong a second ago. Obviously, the next step better from that would be to say, let's have the computer and all the miracles of predictive modeling and data science actually predict what's going to happen with a degree of confidence. And then all I have to do as a human is not try to predict the future, but just decide what to do based on that. And then some even go a step further from predictive and say, look, what I really want to do is prescriptive analytics. Have the computer not even show all that work, just say, here's what you want to do. Instead of predicting that we're going to run out of toilet paper, just tell me to buy more toilet paper. And maybe even, wow, futuristic thinking, what if we plugged the prediction system into the procurement system so that without even having a human in the loop, we make that order and place it. And I think that is an exciting idea. And by the way, Andy actually talked about in parallel two other things we can do, going from those consulting projects to continuous updates in real time, and going from using all these analytics internally to exposing them externally, the Enrichment Studio, and Intelligence Studio to helping external parties to your company benefit. And all of this is really exciting and up into the right kind of stuff. But here's the caveat. All three of these and every kind of level that we talked about earlier, they're all garbage in, garbage out. Put in the wrong data, terrible things will happen. And actually, the stakes just get higher and higher as things get, quote unquote, better and better. Right? If it's a consulting project describing the past, you have, some business analysts, double, triple check every slide. Probably nothing wrong is going to get in there. If you've got a data quality issue in a system that's totally closed with no humans in it, something really bad could happen. So what we sort of encourage our customers to do is, don't forget step zero. What is step zero? For data analysts and data scientists, whether they're trying to build a dashboard in the descriptive phase, build a predictive model in the predictive phase, or a recommendation engine or that kind of thing in prescriptive, well, the step zero is to get the right source data or the right training data, get the right data so that everything goes well. And there are actually some subparts to that. Step 0A is find the relevant data sets. Step 0B is understand each well enough to select one that you can trust. Step 0C is to use it correctly with all those caveats. Andy talked about making sure it's joined correctly, filtered correctly, mapping the data model properly, using the right statistical sample size, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, it will not shock you to hear that Alation can help with all of those critical things. So, Andy mentioned the 52 million items cataloged around the world. Alation does a similar thing where we crawl and index all of your data sources to find the 52 million or more or less tables and columns and fields and files in file systems and key values and key value stores. All of those data elements, we'll crawl index it no matter where it lives, cloud, on-prem, whatever. and no matter what type it is, and you can just search natural language to find it. You leave the data where it is, but we index it and give you one place to find it all. So you'll see in this example, hopefully you can see my mouse, that I can type in natural language social security number, and I'll find many different columns, even though they have different physical names, like social security number with no vowels and no M, or SSN, or SOCSEC-NUM. All of those just show up, so I can find all the relevant things and pick the one that's right for me. And this is, again, a bit analogous to Andy's point about the cryptic receipts, that you might get from a retailer. You look at it when you get home, there's no vowels in it, what the heck is it? We can make that easier because we have technology that's kind of like a baby's brain that eavesdrops on all the conversation that's happening. Allie, the Alation robot, will eavesdrop on your organization's language and figure out what all those weird abbreviations and acronyms mean that appear. So a quick example, BIN could literally mean bin, could be short for binary. Specifically at eBay, one of the auction sites, it stands for buy it now. Similarly, a quick pop quiz, if you guys heard, and I won't be able to hear your answers, but just think, what does HD mean to you? HD. What does OOP mean to you? So to me, HD, I think high definition. OOP, because I'm a big nerd, I think object-oriented programming. I mentioned Express Scripts earlier, especially pharmacy. In their company vernacular, what does that mean? Turns out HD, I'll start with OOP. OOP is out of pocket for payments. And HD stands for home delivery, which again, very critical right now. And on the right, you can see a screenshot of this lexicon that enables this easy to find relevant data phenomenon with, auth. Here you can see someone's mousing over. Allie has a medium confidence guess, so her head is yellow, and you can confirm or reject it as a human due to supervised machine learning. So that's some of the tech that underlies the ability to find, that first step in getting the right data. This is how to understand and trust data. I'll go through this pretty quickly because I want to leave some time for questions at the end. But we think about a catalog as being like a map of your data. If you think about a modern map like Google Maps, there's some crowdsourced information like you get from an app like Waze, but there's also automatically collected information that you get from just observing how fast phones are moving on highways and collecting traffic data. And I think this is analogous to what Andy was describing of how you have data that you collect from home scanning receipts or from being provided by a retailer, and you kind of put it all together as different layers to the view we develop. So if you think about getting a data asset that I might want to use, before I understand it, before I trust it, effectively it's blurry, it's scary, and what you want to do is use all these layers to kind of add clarity, bring it into focus, and add some color. So the first thing we'll do is extract the physical metadata. So for this table, I can see the schema that it's in, the columns that are in it, their physical types. Then I can see physical data here, but often it ends up getting redacted because it's sensitive. I talked already about auto titling, where Allie the robot says SUM stands for summary and DRG stands for diagnosis-related groups in this case. So the query log processing, to which Andy alluded, that's where the magic really happens. I'll just do a little bit of preamble here. This is a bit like Andy's Spectra and home scan examples. In the Spectra case, saying you can get the basic technical demographics where somebody lives, but what's really interesting is how do they shop. That's what this behavioral metadata is like. And similarly to home scan, where you scan the receipts or scan the items to get the broader usage patterns, we do the same thing. Receipts are intended for proof of payment, but we use them for but Nielsen uses them to look at patterns and do segmentation and predict buying behavior. In the same way, all data tools have query logs for debugging and audit purposes, but we can then parse those out to figure out who's using what data and how. And so we can see things like, as Andy mentioned, what we call popularity. It's a recency matrix based on the recency and frequency of use, tells you what data is most relevant and most useful, correlates very strongly with good quality data. We can see who's using it and ask those folks questions to see if they're all in the same function that is relevant to us. Other tabs going across the top, so I would click on joins. I'd see what I can join this table with to kind of combine the model like Andy was showing to get all the different UPCs and other item listings. Lineage, Andy already showed that. I won't go into detail. But you get all this information automatically on day one just by having the machine do all the work before any humans add that great subject matter expertise stuff that you saw in the article that Andy showed. And then after that, experts and crowds can come in and add more information like descriptions and tags and everything you see here, including those flags Andy alluded to with the stoplight metaphor, red, yellow, green. Red light means stop, don't use it, it's deprecated. Yellow means proceed with caution, it's a caveat. And green means go ahead, use it, it's endorsed. And that helps with trust. So this shows how you can understand what you're looking at, where it came from, who's using it, how they're using it, whether you can trust it. And now real quick, because there's not much time, I'll talk about that last part of getting the right data, using it correctly and quickly. So if a catalog is a map of your data, we also want to provide GPS navigation, turn-by-turn directions based on where you are, which you've already kind of typed in your query, and where you're going, indicated by what you type in English. So here, if I type in MAL, I might want to filter to mail or to a given country code, and all that logic can be suggested to me. Oops, sorry, a little fast there. The second thing we do is what we call trust check, real quick. And this is an example where in, again, that composed query tool that Andy was showing, I see that social security number is, something that is sensitive that I shouldn't use. This could similarly be used to prevent misuse of the PII information from the loyalty cards Andy was talking about, or to prevent, sharing information between competitors, also from that same use case. We've heard other examples that I don't have time to go into. The other thing I'll say is it also works not just for being compliant, but being correct. Andy mentioned the data quality example where you might have too small a statistical sample. Other examples could be stale data, whatever else. All of that can be surfaced to the user right at the moment they're about to make a mistake. Just the way that spell check helps you avoid, having an embarrassing typo in an email. This can save hours and hours of that valuable data scientist and analyst time, as Andy was saying. So that is how you can use data quickly, correctly, with confidence. So, step 0, get the right data, find, understand, trust, use. Alation enables all of that. Data, no matter where it, find anything, no matter where it is, what it's called, understand it, trust that it's correct, use it properly. And that lets your organization safely climb. When individual data analysts and data scientists can do that, your organization can move from descriptive to predictive to prescriptive analytics and go from internal to external and go from consulting to continuous and do all of that in a way that leads to success. So the organizational step 0 is to just get an enterprise data catalog. I highly recommend Alation. Get the right data, feed that data to your people and your algorithms, and on the other side, get the right results for your business and hopefully then join these customers here and many, many more around the world in the Alation nation, if you will. And with that, and I'm sorry to run over, hopefully we can go a little extra time for questions, Q&A.
Awesome. Yeah, and if we can't get to your questions today, we'll follow up with you and try to get those answered. But we do have a bunch of good ones. So, Andy, let's start with this one. This asks, how well are your SMEs connected to the data technical side? Getting the right level of information combined to the right data seems quite daunting without a way to orient. How do you steer or manage this aspect?
Great question. Part of the answer is probably that we're a data business. So our SMEs, almost by definition, are data SMEs compared to if we were in manufacturing or financial services or entertainment or something like that. So they tend to be fairly well connected to the data anyway, and they tend to have pretty high degree of expertise in terms of understanding, what's a table, what's a column, how to read an ER diagram, how to read and write SQL. But certainly daunting, yes. So the entry point tends to be people have some idea what data they're looking for. So they may be looking for the retail sales, they may be looking for some audit data, they may be looking for some home scan purchase data. So one of the things that Alation lets us do is create a taxonomy. So, I'm sure Nielsen's looks somewhat like other people's who use Alation, but it won't be identical. That's fully under our control. So the headings that we've used, one of the headings is Nielsen product, and it will contain those kind of things that I said. And if you went to that article, you'd find some general purpose description of it, but it would lead you then to the relevant data model, the particular databases, so you could look at the tables, the example queries, and all the rest of it. So usually the entry point would be, I've got an idea what I'm looking for, start at an article, and we've tried there to lead you to the details that might be relevant to you.
Great, thank you. This question, some people have a challenge internally justifying that the data catalog is critical to their organization's success. How would you suggest other organizations justify the investment?
Yeah, that's a good one as well. It's very difficult to put numbers to, as in, you know, what's the dollar benefit, what's my return on investment going to be? We did that to some extent, but you could challenge the sort of the financial rigor of it. But I guess from a Nielsen point of view, 3 aspects that were compelling when we were thinking about this. And I mean, obviously we are a data company, we're trying to build a platform our clients need to find their way around is almost a given. But in terms of justifying that, the first I would say is the opportunity cost of the time our subject matter experts save. So if you just say, you know, 10 people save 10 hours, multiply that by their salary, you don't get to nearly a big enough number. It's the value that those people generate to the business with the products that they invent, which is many times leveraged to their actual salary. So that would be my first one, would be the opportunity cost of your most valuable resources that you're saving. The second one's kind of related to that. It's about the products that you can make. Now, in Nielsen terms, that's analytic products to gain some insight and monetize it by selling it to our clients. I guess in other businesses, that would be the efficiency you can gain in processes, the opportunities to sell that you can identify or prioritize because of that. So it's the value of the product. Now, you can't claim that a data catalog lets you make a product or improve a process alone, but you can claim that it makes it faster and easier and lower cost to do that, and try and put some numbers to that. And the third one, particularly Nielsen, but I think any business, would be the cost of not doing it. So what's the risk of somebody misinterpreting the data, making a bad decision, in Nielsen's case, representing to a client that something's happening in the market that it turns out really isn't, and we've got it wrong, we've given them bad data. Now that's, I suppose it may be a demand for compensation at the extreme, or even a legal suit, but it's the kind of that reputational damage our business rests on, people believing our measurements are trustworthy and accurate. So that would be my third argument, the risk of not doing it.
Andy, that was incredible, and the first and last I think we hear across the board from our customers. For the folks wondering the same thing, I'll just give an example of the second one you mentioned, that a catalog can have some substantial role in the development of a new product or offering, supplement, because you're a data company. Munich Reinsurance, they're not selling physical goods and services. We do have some examples of using data to optimize that process, but they created 2 new insurance products, one for rapid reimbursement of people who are the victims of natural disasters, and the other is the first end-to-end insurance product for wind farms. And both of those were only possible because of some of the collaboration and understanding that the catalog allowed, and I believe you can read about both online. So I think all 3 of your examples are great, and even though it might seem more tenuous, you're not alone in being able to do product development.
Awesome. So Andy, thank you for joining, and Aaron, thank you for the presentation today. Looks like we're going to get kicked in about 30 seconds, but we have a lot of great questions. So we